I'd like for you to take your Bibles and turn to James chapter 5. And I want you to think, as you're turning to James chapter 5, about rich people. Do you know any rich people? Have you ever been rich? Have you ever met anyone who's rich? Do you have a rich uncle? Was your grandfather rich? We're going to talk a little bit about rich people today. And I want you to think especially about how a Christian should respond when a wicked rich person oppresses the poor. Rich people don't always treat poor people well. And I'd like for you to think about how should a Christian respond when a rich person treats a poor person poorly. We're going to read in a moment in James chapter 5. I'll give you a bit of an overview of what we've already learned from James. It's a book about how spiritual maturity is displayed. How do I know if I'm spiritually mature or immature? In the first chapter, he says, look at the way that you respond to trials and temptations. That will tell you if you're mature or immature. In the second chapter, he says, ask yourself when a rich person comes into your church, how do you treat them? In comparison to when a poor person comes into your church, how do you treat them? That will let you know if you're spiritually mature or immature. In the third chapter, he says, how do you use your tongue? Are you wise and are you able to control your tongue? If so, then you're spiritually mature. If you just open it up and all kinds of swearing and blasphemy and vile things come out of your mouth, then you're spiritually immature. In fact, you might not even be saved, right? But you're for sure not spiritually mature. In the fourth chapter, he says, how do you deal with conflict? And last Wednesday night, if you were with us, we were at the end of the fourth chapter, where the Bible says that a spiritually mature person displays their maturity by depending on God or including Him in their plans. Remember at the end of the fourth chapter in verse 13, he says, when you go to make plans, you say, if the Lord wills. If it's God's will, I'll do this or that. A spiritually immature person does not depend upon God and does not include Him in their thinking or in their planning. Today we're going to get into the fifth chapter and discuss how a spiritually mature person responds to rich people, especially when rich people treat poor people poorly. So let's read it here. We're in James chapter number 5. Let's read verse number 1. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. So think about that for a moment. Why would a rich person ever be weeping and howling? In the future, they've got all kinds of money and influence. Let's go on in verse 2. Your riches are corrupted. Think they'll ever lose their riches? Your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you, and you shall eat your flesh as it were fire. You've heaped treasure together for the last days. So we're talking about the last days and the condition of a rich, wicked person in the last days. Verse 4 says, behold, the hire of your laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped have entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You've lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You've nourished your heart as in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. So that's the wicked rich. How should I respond to that? Verse 7, be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one another against another. Brethren, lest ye be condemned, behold, the judge standeth at the door. Take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. You have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, and the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. So we'll just pause there and go back to verse number 1, where it says about rich men. So let me ask you, who knows a rich person? Anybody know a rich person? You do? Who do you know that's rich? Or you don't have to tell us who they are, but...
All the guys that run the university and stuff like that.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, they're all pretty well off.
So your employer is pretty well off, and they're in Germany, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
he lives in Switzerland, the guy that owns like the whole thing, he lives in Switzerland, but all the other kind of bigwigs all kind of live around Germany and Bavaria and stuff like that.
Okay. Just as an exercise, can anybody name some of the richest people in the world? Elon Musk? Yeah, I think he's number 1, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's right there.
Yeah. Any other names come to mind? Donald Trump? Yeah, he's... Jeff Bezos, yeah. Okay, so think about those rich people for a moment. Do you think that when they are in their private clubs or their big conferences, like they have one right now, does anybody know where it's going on? Yeah, a place called Davos. They're all meeting there. Our Prime Minister was there. The President of the United States was there. Probably all these rich and influential people that we would talk about have something to do with that conference. So now think about them in their secret rooms and their big high-powered headquarters and limousines. Are they genuinely concerned for you? Do they really care about you? Are they thinking about you and how they can make your life better, how they can give you more freedom, more wealth, and give you more opportunities? Do you think that the rich really genuinely care for those who are not rich or for the poor? Or do they care mostly for themselves? Now, we can't talk individually about each one because I've never met them. But I think collectively, generally, the rich should be howling and weeping at the end of the judgment because of the things that they've done according to James chapter 5. And we're going to get to that and look at what these rich men and women have done. But before we condemn the ultra-rich, don't you think that being rich is a little bit dependent on your perspective? For example, if you're homeless and your neighbor has a home, regardless of the condition of the home, wouldn't you think, well, he's rich, look, he's got a home, he's got a car, or he's got a side-by-side, or he must be rich. Look at me, I'm homeless, and he has a home. So I think sometimes, depending on your perspective, somebody who just has a little bit more than you can be viewed as being rich. In fact, I was reading Dr. Brand, his book, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made. He talks about the rich young ruler in Matthew 19. Do you remember? The rich young ruler came to Jesus. And listen to what he writes. He writes it as a prayer, this Dr. Brand. Dear Lord, I've been rereading the record of the rich young ruler and his obviously wrong choice. But it has set me thinking, no matter how much wealth he had, he could not ride in a car, he could not have any surgeries, he could not turn on a light, buy penicillin, hear an organ, watch TV, wash dishes in running water, type a letter, mow a lawn, fly in an airplane, sleep on a mattress, or talk on the phone. So who is really the rich young person? From that perspective, I'm rich, and you're rich. And compared to people in other parts of the world, like in Africa, where our missionaries Margaret Mead, Ben Ward, and Obed and Lacey serve, I'm sure that a lot of those people would look at us and say, we're rich. Come into our homes and into our church and say, wow, look at all that you have. You must be rich. We don't feel rich, maybe. Can you be rich and a Christian? Can you be rich and good? I think so. Yeah. I think there's lots of evidence that there's good, rich people, godly, Christian, rich people. Are there wicked rich people? Are there evil rich people? Unsaved, going to hell, rich people? Yeah, that's who we're talking about in James chapter 5. Rich, wicked people. And I know that they're wicked because in verse 1, at the end of the judgment, are they smiling and happy because they're entering into heaven and getting a mansion and seeing Jesus? No, what's their condition in verse 1? They're weeping and howling. Who weeps and howls at the judgment? The lost, the unsaved. So these particular rich people are ungodly, wicked, rich people. And we're going to see what our response should be. But first, let's see what they have done, especially to the poor. Now, let's keep in mind the context in James 4. Remember last week, at the end of James 4, we were supposed to depend upon God for all things. When we make our plans, we're supposed to say, if the Lord wills. Do you think that the average rich person, with all of their status and money and certificates and assistance, do you think that they really depend upon the Lord? For example, I'll give you an example. Let's say a rich person was locked out of their home. Or a rich person had a son that was maybe mentally ill. Or they had some great loss or grief in their life. Would they immediately pray to God for their need? Would they immediately look to the Bible or go and visit a pastor and ask for advice? I've never been rich, so I'd have to guess, but I would imagine they'd probably call one of their assistants, or they'd call their banker or their lawyer, or somebody in one of their numerous companies would be able to fix the problem for them, and they would never need God's resources, God's help. They'd never look to God. Why would they? They have everything they think that they need. Some of the other difficulties that you see here are that they, according to, say, for example, verse number 4, they hire laborers to reap their fields, and in that day it was a big agricultural society. Today we'd say, oh, they hire technicians to run their AI, or researchers or engineers. They hire these people, and then look at what happens in verse 4. They keep back what that person is owed. They're fraudulent, some of them. Now, not every rich person. There's some good employers, for sure. But I'm sure there's the odd employee somewhere in the world who says, my employer is not paying me what they owe me. They have all of the money and the income, but they're not sharing it with the rest of the employees. Look further down, it says, in verse number 5, they live in pleasure on the earth. And that's the idea of luxury. Not just a little bit of pleasure, but wanton pleasure, it says there, which means excessive luxury. You ever seen a rich person live excessively? Like instead of buy one car for their family, they buy 12 cars. Or instead of having 4 pairs of shoes, they have 50 pairs of shoes. Have you ever seen the excess of a rich person? Is that the way that we're supposed to live? Are we supposed to just build bigger barns and bigger barns to hold all of our belongings? Some of the other difficulties here is in verse number 5 at the end. It says they've nourished their hearts, and that's in the day of slaughter. In other words, they're like James is a great storyteller. He says they're like cattle out there in the field, and they're just munching on all of the grass that they can eat, just enjoying the afternoon sun, not realizing that at the end of the day, they're going to slaughter. It's their last day, and the barn is getting ready to take their life. The farmer is in the barn. And the Bible is teaching here that every person, rich or poor, has to stand before God one day. And here are the rich, misusing their employees oftentimes, living in excess luxury, and at any moment the Lord could return. And at the end of the judgment, we're all going to be standing there naked before the Lord. Remember what Job said? Naked came I into this world, naked will I go out. And Ecclesiastes 5 says the same thing. I came out of my mother's womb naked, and I'm going to go into the grave naked. So when I stand before the Lord, I won't have my friends there. I won't have my family there. I won't have any certificates. I won't have any clothing. I won't have any way to hide. And if I were rich, I certainly wouldn't have any money, any lawyers, any of the wealth that none of my businesses. I am there naked before the Lord, and He's the only one who can help me. And if I have offended Him and not believed in His Son, what hope is there for me? I have no resources, nothing that I can say, here's my wealth, can I offer it to you? Would you like some clothes? How about my 50 pairs of shoes? Are they of any value? I have nothing. I am naked before the Lord, and my only hope is that I have pleased Him and I have accepted His Son. Otherwise, I'll be weeping and howling, it says, at the judgment. A couple of last thoughts here. What should my response be to all of the injustice that I see, especially when the rich are mistreating the poor? You can see in verse 6, it says they condemn and they kill the just. Maybe they directly kill, or just through their actions. They poison the water, they poison the land, they pollute everything, and people in sight of their industry or their mines or whatever are dying. What should my response be in verse 7? You would think by this point that James would launch into a revolution and say we should all rebel against the rich, that 1%. We should march to their headquarters and tear them down from their ivory towers and burn their images in the streets and call for them to be in jail and even kill them and take over their businesses and their industry. That's what you might think James would encourage the Christian to do, and that's how many in the world respond. But look at what verse 7 says. Be patient. Now this is right at the end of James, and if you remember, James begins and ends with patience. Remember how James chapter 1 and verse number 3 began? In all of our trials and temptations. Chapter 1 verse 3 says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience, but let patience have her perfect work. So he begins with patience, and he ends with patience. And look at how much patience there is in verses 7 and 8. It's just patience, 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 all the way down through. And then in verse 11 he says, think about all of those prophets who've gone before. Verse 10 says about the prophets, and then verse 11 gives you a direct example in Job. He says, They were patient and they waited on the Lord to judge justly and properly. And one day there's coming a great final judgment. And all of humanity will stand before the Lord, and he will look into the hearts, and he will look at the life, and he will look at the relationship that we have with his Son, and he will judge righteously. And James says to the poor, oppressed people, and to all spiritual Christians, he says, you just wait. The rich are going to get what they deserve, the wicked rich, and the Lord will deal with them. You just be patient. And he said, if you're like Job, and in all the injustice, you've lost wages that you're owed, you've been sued for your house and farm, and now the rich man has it. And they've taken your daughters, and they've put your wife in jail, and whatever the rich have done that's wrong. James says to the spiritually mature Christian, you just wait patiently like Job did. And don't grudge and don't condemn, and you establish your heart and grow in your faith. And like Job, who knows what happened to Job at the end? Did he end up the loser? He got it all back, and how much more? He got double, right? Twice as much. Because he waited patiently. At the end, he got double of what he was owed or what was taken from him. And James is using the same example here for everybody who's ever been oppressed by a rich person. He says, you wait on the Lord, you trust the Lord, and at the end, you'll see that the rich is howling, and you will have twice as much as what you lost or what you missed out on because you were so mistreated in this world. The Lord will see that you get your reward in heaven. And so just be patient, he says, and wait on the Lord, and that will show that you're a spiritually mature person. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? Yes?
You were saying about perspective or whatever. I was listening to this guy talk one time, and he said, back in the old days, he said, if you had a horse, like if you owned a horse, he said you were like in demand in the village kind of thing. He said if you had two horses, you were like royalty. And then he said, each one of you have 180 horses in your yard right now. Car. You know what I mean? But we don't really think of those things, compare ourselves to the past, kind of, you know what I mean? Like those old generations.
Yeah.
But we really are rich beyond and blessed beyond anything they could imagine back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure that perspective makes all the difference. If I was well-traveled or lived in another part of the world and I came to Canada, even if I went to the hospital that everybody complains about all of the time, about all of the overcrowding and the poor service, I'm sure if I came from a very poor country, I'd go into that hospital and say, what's everybody complaining about? This is beautiful. Look, we don't have this kind of medicine or this many doctors or even beds available in my whole country. So we in many ways, we are the rich, and we have to be careful not to misuse our privileges. Okay, thanks, Randy.